Jeg vil skifte til engelsk for at præsentere vores næste talere, who are here to give us a diagnosis of the times we live in. Because how and why is the geopolitical landscape changing? And what does it mean to Denmark and you as Danish businesses? Please welcome to the stage to talk about that. Distinguished fellow at Chatham House in London, welcome, Sir Robin Niblett, who is also Senior Advisor of Center of Strategic and International Studies, accompanied by a guy I think some of you may know. He's Vice President and Head of Government Affairs at Seascaler, former tech ambassador Casper Klynge. Give them a warm hand, please.
Thanks, Charlie.
Well, thanks very much, Charlotte, and thanks very much for listening in. I think I can be honest in saying we've been friends for a decade now, and Robin is, in my view, one of the premier thought leaders in Europe, so you're in for a treat. But I will begin by saying I'm a little bit concerned about today, Robin, because we've done this before. The last time we had a fireside chat, it was in the old stock exchange building.
Is this wooden? Is this building wooden as well? I can't tell.
No, but it's a famous building in Copenhagen, so I just want to make sure no tricks afterwards or anything like that. Promise?
My matches, you know,
Okay.
my match juggling trick, I won't do that, yeah.
Okay. It's actually a joke you have to be very careful about because that building is sort of unique in Copenhagen, so I was in doubt whether anybody laughed. Thanks a lot for doing that. Listen, we don't have a ton of time and we have a lot of topics to cover, and I thought we would sort of begin very high level, talk about geopolitics, where everything is fine, then move a little bit into Europe and Brexit, the European model, the Danish model, and then finish up with what I think a lot of people in the room might be interested in. What does it mean for businesses? What does it mean for leaders? Does that sound like a game plan?
It's a game plan. Let's go for it.
Good. Let's go for it. So, geopolitically, I think, if we had this conversation 6 months ago, we would have probably spoken about, a world that is difficult, unpredictable, rivalry between the US and China, a Europe that is less cohesive and perhaps a bit fragmented. But I think since the 20th of January, things have accelerated ever so slightly. And in my own conversations with politicians and leaders, I think people don't realize how dramatic a change we've seen in a very short time span. The psychology is different. We talk about the US in a different way. And perhaps when your friends turn their backs against you, it feels a little bit different. But Robin, you follow this for years. I mean, how dramatic a change are we facing right now?
Well, Casper, thanks very much. It is great to be here, and great to be here with Danish business leaders from across the spectrum. It's real. It's dramatic. This isn't just another blip. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine was a geopolitical moment. America's invasion of Iraq was a moment. But what is happening at the moment is watching the country that underwrote and designed the rules around which we've organized international relations and around which all of you have been organizing your businesses. The country that designed those rules is saying, I'm not interested in them anymore. In fact, I think those rules are holding me back. And I'll do better if we don't have rules. And it's a free-for-all. Problem is, as Europeans, we remember what free-for-all is like on our own continent. We learnt those lessons extremely painfully. And it's been interesting to have the United States for over 80 years underwriting an effort by smaller countries to write rules for international relations, whether it be economic relations, trade relations, or security relations. But America, under Donald Trump at least, is saying, we want to be a big power again. And big powers do what they want. Now, I might say that's a very short-term approach, even for a big power. But from Donald Trump's and those around him, his viewpoint, what's the point of being a big power if you don't use it? And use it to your own advantage. So that is a structural change in international relations. The thing about Donald Trump is it's also an accelerated change. People thought this would be something that might play itself out over time, but he is in a race. He knows, because it's his second term, he has to make things happen really fast. He won't get a second term, if you see what I mean.
Well,
I would call it a third term. I don't think he will. We'll see. But he's certainly acting as if he won't.
Yeah.
And so it's structural, it's accelerated, and it's having obviously a global impact. So yeah, no, I think what we're living through right now is a fundamental moment, and a fundamental moment for Europe as well. Ivan Krastev, my friend, very good sort of Bulgarian-based analyst, described this moment where we're living in the period that ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the emergence of a new wall between Europe and Russia in particular, but also potentially between Europe and America. So yeah, it's a pretty dramatic moment.
So I think for both of us and for a lot of people in this room who've been sort of believing in the transatlantic relationship as the foundation for our security, for our international role, etc. And the Americans always say you build up trust in droplets and you lose it in buckets, and it feels like a pretty big bucket that we're losing it with right now. And therefore, I think also when you speak to people in Europe, there is this hope that, is this just 4 years we need to cope with, and then everything is going to be over, we'll be back to normality. But for those of us who lived a little bit in the US, and you have done as well, Robin, it's not a guarantee, I guess. I mean, you feel that the US society is, in some ways at least, aligning behind Trump. So in your views, I mean, can we look into a future where normality is going to return, or is Biden actually going to be the outlier rather than Trump?
Look, I think the first thing to say, and I was just writing it down before I forget it, the normality before was not normal, or at least I'd say was not sustainable. Let me give you one example. NATO has been enlarging for 20 years roughly. And that enlargement genuinely took shape because most people thought we would never go to war. So actually you're enlarging NATO to create a security framework within which then the economic enlargement of the European Union could also take place. But whereas the European Union is a kind of real thing which operates on a day-to-day basis on rules of market access and regulation, etc., NATO is based on faith. Faith. Faith that if something really bad happened, in particular to European countries, America would be there for you. Now I'd ask the question to this room, if Vladimir Putin had invaded Estonia under Biden, and taken 20 kilometers of it or 30 kilometers, say, well, we're just defending some of our citizens here. And, would Biden have gone to war with Russia for Estonia? Would Americans have supported Biden doing that? Would the US Congress have backed him on it? Or part of Romania, or Bulgaria for that matter? Trump is calling out a reality, which is that as Europeans, we've been relying on an idea of American protection of our security that has been eroding, I think, for a long time. Because, in a way, we were relying on America to do the hard work, and we weren't doing enough of it ourselves. So normality, I think, was not normal. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back, actually, to pre-Trump, because it was false. It was a mirage in some ways. Now, it's a pretty brutal reality to be in with Trump, so I'm not saying this is a good place to be. So the first point is the past was not as good as it was. The future may not be as bad as the president. Trump is unique, is what I mean by that. He's a cipher, he's a transition mechanism, he's unique as a human being. I mean, I think I can make that statement fairly confidently. And he is bringing out, as I discussed a minute ago, some of I'd say the worst instincts of Americans. But that is what it is. We've all got bad instincts, and bad leaders can bring them out. But a future American leader that is facing the challenge of an increasingly strong China. We can discuss how quickly it's becoming strong, but it's still on an upward journey, even if it's slower than it was
It's my next
before.
question. You cannot jump
Okay, I'll stop quickly.
Okay.
So let me go further. We'll come to China.
Yeah.
But just to finish your question about America, America can't face the future confidently alone. If you look at any polling of the United States, over 60% of Americans tend to say alliances are useful for America. As long as people are paying their way, as long as we're not paying too much. I think even a future Republican administration or a Democratic administration will want allies, and our job is to be better allies next time than we have been for the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, no, I agree on that. And by the way, it's great to have a Brit say that the European Union is a real thing. You might want to bring that back to headquarters. Thanks for saying
All right,
that.
yeah, I can say these things now that I don't run Chatham House, and I can say them confidently. I used to say them at Chatham House as well, by the way, but still, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
China. Of course, you wrote a book, The New Cold War, which is very much about the rivalry between the US and China. And I think when you look at the United States right now, one of the few areas where the Republicans and Democrats are united is actually in the analysis that long-term China is the main enemy or the main adversary for the US. But we're using the same terminology with the US as we have been with China, de-risking, decoupling. But say a few more words, you did it already, about how you see China in the big picture. Because have Trump de facto pushed Europeans more in the direction of China now?
Well, it's interesting because there's two parts to answering that question. The first one, what's the journey China is on? And then I suppose the decision that we should be taking as Europeans. Under Xi Jinping, China is on a journey of what he calls the Great Rejuvenation, which, as many people have noted, is a journey not just about becoming economically strong, but recovering from the humiliation of the 150 years that we as Europeans in particular, but Americans as well, imposed on them, up till the 1930s and so on. So that period is animating for Xi Jinping, and for many of China's Communist Party leadership, and it is being inculcated into a new generation through TV, through media, through social media, through that journey. And the reason I mention this is that China is on its own journey. It's not a journey to be like us. It's not a journey to join in some international rules-based system, even if America was backing it, which it isn't right now. It is on a journey to be able to be itself in its own way, to make the world safe, I would say, for top-down government. To make the world safe for a place in which countries can be ruled by small cliques, because they believe, the Communist Party believes, that without the Communist Party running China, China will be vulnerable to being humiliated again in the future. And to do that, it means a system of governments with surveillance, lack of transparency, lack of accountability. It means changing the UN system to a state-led system, get rid of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, rights of freedom of expression, rights of minorities, not interested. I mean, this is a country that is going to be powerful enough to change part of the balance of how the world is run. And we were relying on America to be with us for an alternative view of that. So the reason I want to say this is that China is going to be militarily strong enough to defend its future. It is going to be able to design a technology ecosystem, which at a minimum, they will be able to run their own economy with. And many other governments are going to say, actually, I kind of like that top-down government thing, and I'll take some of your technology as well. So China is changing the whole nature of what international economic relations and international economy is about. Of course, it's also doing some amazing stuff on green tech, which as Europeans we'd like to tap into, and it's doing some pretty cool stuff, with electric vehicles. So to answer your second part of your question and answer it quickly, given what I said about America earlier, I think as Europeans we need to make sure that we're not trapped by America's strategic competition with China, which is not just about values, it's about who dominates the Pacific. As Europeans, to be frank, we don't care that much about who dominates the Pacific. We do care about who dominates Europe, or making sure that, Russia doesn't dominate Europe. So we have a different strategic view to China, but we are with America we're with the old America on the values part. So we have to be very cautious about how far we let China into our system. We have to let them into our market on our rules, not on their rules, and take advantage of this moment where maybe China can't get into America and therefore need to get into Europe to write our rules for their access to our market. We've got to be strong.
And there might be an interest for China also to dominate sort of the swing states around the world. You indicated that for Southeast Asia, etc. Let's move a little bit further away from the big picture and a bit closer to home. Let's talk about Europe, a little bit about the UK Brexit. So I think one of the interesting aspects when you look at the main parameters for Europe is that it doesn't look great. We don't have a number of the biggest companies, most valuable companies in the world. Our share of the global economy is going down. For those of you who read the Draghi report or the Letta report, it's not sort of a cozy reading that you enjoy before going to bed. It's pretty dramatic. So where is Europe in all of this? I mean, working for a US technology company, there are certainly some aspirations around sovereignty, strategic autonomy that is going through the roof, and where you could argue that that Trump has sort of also led to a reckoning inside Europe that we need to do more alone.
I mean, I always think there are at least 4 areas in which, as Europeans, we are deficient. I said earlier, as Europeans, we are a combination of small countries. We're either countries that know we're small, or countries that don't know they're small.
Listen, we have Greenland.
True. It's a good point.
At least a little while longer. So
good point. Good point.
Okay.
Just need a few more people on it, but and a few more people here as well.
It's a biased audience.
But you're right. You're a big country geographically. But the things that we lack collectively, this group of small countries, the 2 maybe most important ones in near term is energy at a decent price. So you look at China, and China is becoming an energy superpower in green energy, and doing it at the scale it's doing it at. Actually, their energy is probably going to be cheap. There will be an industrial producer at relatively cheap and sustainable and relatively secure sources. America is also an energy superpower, but it can use fossil fuels as well as green energy to do it. As Europeans, we lack the energy to be as successful as we should be economically. We lack money. I mean, people may have money individually, we've got savings, but we can't deploy it through deep, liquid capital markets the way America can, and China might be able to in the future. And then to your space, we lack technology platforms, even though we have technology ingenuity, and even in AI, you know, with Mistral and some others, you've got people who could at least, we know people who know how to do it, but again, we lack the scale at a market level to be able to do it. And then we talked about defense. So let me leave defense off the agenda. So as Europeans, the journey is all about creating scale. And you know, I see the fact that the UK is trying right now to repair its relationship with the European Union as an effort to reintegrate itself with scale that we cannot create by ourselves, and we're certainly not going to create through trade agreements with America or ASEAN or Trans-Pacific Partnership or whatever. Those are useful at the margins, but they're not going to be useful at the core. So the question is, what can we do, and what can we do at pace? I think that deregulation, I'm just, you know, just look, read the Draghi report. I'm not going to go through it. You all know it. Many of you have read it there. But I think some of the most important elements is to take another run at having money accessible, venture capital, equity capital, not having to rely on bank loans for big European investment is probably one of the most important things. I think investing in the green energy transition, making that part of our comparative advantage over time, using China, as I mentioned a minute ago, who want access to our market. We can use gas as a transition fuel. America hopefully will provide it. It's one of the things they want to export more, obviously, to us on. I mean, the thing about Europe is our destiny is in our hands. The problem is it requires some very difficult choices to be made by governments to continue pooling aspects of their sovereignty over very difficult areas. Services sector, energy sector, and money. And my experience is most European governments have not been willing to open up the capital markets because they want to keep using their national banks to bankroll their own spending and don't want to get in a position where they lose that control. So doing that would be important.
I think one of the funny things that The Economist did recently was to, I think it was primarily a joke, but they said, we should put up President Trump for the Charlemagne Prize, the prize that you give for the person who's done most for European integration. And I think there's a little bit about that. We are forced to do more on ourselves. We have to do a little bit of a quick round because we have 3 questions that we need to get through, Robin, so we need to be a little bit disciplined. I want to go to the topic of this summit, which is the future role of the Danish model, or let's expand it, the European model, in this world which is unpredictable and a little bit more driven by power. Welfare states, respect for democracy, for facts, for institutions. I mean, is there a role for the European model, the Danish model, in the world that you're looking at?
Look, I think the European model and the Danish model has often been held out as one of the most successful examples of the social market, with social and market obviously both being critical parts of it. From everything I understand, and traveling around the world, if you ask people where would they most like to kind of live, it tends to be Europe. Mm. And I've lived in Europe and America, and America is brutal in many cases, it's dangerous, and I mean that in a very real sense, in many ways. And it has a brutality to its non-social market model that many people don't want to have, and the environmental impacts, etc., etc. So when you look at the surveys, the happiness surveys, many Nordic, in many cases, European countries, tend to come out very high on that. So it is aspirational. I think what Europe offers has been aspirational, and our challenge is to keep it aspirational. To keep aspiring to it and to make sure other countries want to aspire to it. So the question is, can we afford it? So it's not that the model is wrong, socially, it's can we have enough of a market in it for it to be affordable? Mm. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we have scale, and that the many small countries do integration through the European Union. Mm. Countries like the UK on the side will then try to hop into a bit of it, but so will Norway, so will Ukraine, so will Turkey to a certain extent. So I think the model is there. If you look at GDP per capita, we have some of the most successful countries. If you look at some of the technology, invention and innovation, we have some of the best. Our problem is scale. Yeah. So I always say Europe's destiny is in its own hands. So I think, there's a future for the model. Many countries aspire to it. It's the trade-off of opportunity and stability. America offers opportunity, doesn't have the stability, it's more ruthless. We offer the more stability, we don't have the ruthless part. So trying to find a balance between the two should not be impossible.
Good. And then you have a number of leaders in the room today. So I guess the follow-up question to that is, of course, what does that mean for businesses? What does it mean for corporate leaders? One of my own views or assumption is that in times of political turmoil, the private sector will have to step up to the plate and be the custodians of the transatlantic relationship. But the temptation is, of course, to duck and hope for better times. I mean, what does it mean for business leaders here? How do they navigate in the world and in the Europe that you mentioned before? And we'll do sort of a 1.5 minute answer to that one.
So, I can see the time over there as well. I think, first thing, I think you have to accept the world we're in as business leaders. We are not going back to the open, globalized world we had before. It's not coming back, I'm afraid. Which means you probably are going to have to invest a bit more in helping Europe be all it can be, to the answer to your previous question. Interventionism is here to stay. It is the byproduct of 30 years of globalization. Therefore, it's more intervention. It's going to be a more politicized world in which to do business. And if it's a more politicized world in which to do business, you as business leaders have to work out, who are you as companies? Where do you belong, I'm afraid? So the idea of having multi-local companies actually becomes much more difficult, because if you set up a particular structure within an African market versus a US market versus a European market, actually there's not a trending to a mean, to a more transparent rules-based system. You are going to have parts of your business potentially operating under really different rules, which could then affect negatively the core of the business. If you're who are you? If you're a European-based company and you're having to follow anti-bribery rules, transparency rules, anti-corruption rules, actually you're going to need to control the business more from the middle rather than allowing space for everyone to do their own thing locally around the world. The more politicized the world becomes, the more you need to know who you are. Who are your main shareholders? Who are your main board members of your staff? Where are you domiciled? Which government do you go to when you're in trouble? I mean, literally, that's the question you have to ask yourself these days. You can't go to all of them. So I think it's a much more politicized world, and you're going to have to kind of feed that geopolitical instinct, that muscle, into your corporate business. So it's a very difficult thing to do, but my world and your world is now intertwining. There used to be separate worlds, but I feel they're now becoming one.
So I'm afraid of the world we live in, Robin, but I'm even more afraid of Charlotte, who will be giving me
8,
sort
7,
of a hard time if I go over
6,
time.
Yeah.
So listen, the very last question, and then she will possibly crucify me outside. You know, when we met many years ago, we actually did a podcast together, and you probably can't remember, but I had, you know, the final question I asked everybody on that podcast, I also asked you, which is, what is the question I should have asked you, and what is the answer to that question? So, you know, taking a little bit by surprise, any bits for that before we're dragged off stage?
Look, the thing we didn't talk about was opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think the world is growing up. This weird period of American global dominance was great if you were in it, but it's not great. For much of the world, it wasn't great. So Africa, we've not talked about Africa, we've not talked about Southeast Asia, Latin America. These places have the growing middle classes, the population, the minerals, the potential for growth. And so the question is, how do we tap into those markets? And I think European companies, which have got in many cases historical linkages to them, can be part of that wave. There is less anti-Europeanism there, a little bit of colonial stuff. India can be difficult, especially if you're British, but much of the world is looking not to be dominated by America. And helping those countries and those governments move up the value chain, not buying their stuff to make our stuff better, but helping them be richer and us being richer as they get richer. If I can leave one final thought, I think of Europe and Africa as a vertical.
Yeah.
You know, Southeast Asia and China are becoming a vertical. America and South America may become a vertical. But we have to think about Africa as part of our vertical, because otherwise Africa's coming to Europe. And I just think we need, as Europeans, we spend a lot of time obsessing about Europe and the transatlantic relationship. I can leave one thought. We should obsess a bit more about our vertical and what's going to happen as opportunity in Africa.
This is not what I expected. I mean, working for a US technology company, that Robin would end up saying it's very difficult to avoid the dominance of US technology. But anyway, thanks a lot. We'll take that backstage. I can listen to Robin for many, many hours, but now Charlotte is looking at me in an incredibly angry way, so we'll have to drag him off stage. Would you give Robin Niblett a big applause for him being here today? Thanks a lot.